So our learning objectives for today are, after today's webinar, you'll be able to identify important things to consider when creating your message and identify different types of earned media. So we're really lucky to be joined by Sam Inglot this afternoon. Sam is the Deputy Communications Director at Progress Michigan. Before joining the organization, he worked as a reporter in Lansing, where he worked for several publications and covered city government and state politics. At Progress Michigan, he focuses on media relations, elected official accountability, and economic and labor issues. He is a Michigan State University graduate with a bachelor's in journalism with a concentration in public affairs reporting and a specialization in peace and justice studies. He has worked at Progress Michigan since 2013. So with that, Sam, thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation. And if you are talking, you are currently on mute.
There we go. Hello, everyone. Let me get my screen up here. Oh, not my trash. Well, thanks, Mara, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Like Mara said, my name is Sam Inglot. I've been at Progress Michigan. August will be 6 years. And for those of you that don't know, Progress Michigan is a 501c3, C4, nonprofit, nonpartisan communications hub, progressive advocacy organization, and government watchdog group. So in regular people terms, what that means is basically we are PR specialists and communication specialists for the progressive community. So we specialize in message development, communications trainings like this, and assisting our partners from environmental organizations to economic justice organizations with their communications, media, and messaging needs. The presentation I'm going to go over with you today is kind of our flagship training. It should give you a good overview of the media realm and how to navigate it, and just some kind of top line information that will help you understand how you can use the how you can navigate the media to help push your issue, get support for your issue, craft your message, and I think this training actually builds really well into the more kind of in-depth spokesperson training that we'll be doing together on Friday. This is usually one of my favorite trainings to do because I think it's one of those things where these trainings are filled with lots of folks who have really great perspectives on their issue areas, and it's always good to give people the skills that they need to be effective spokespersons for those issues, for your campaigns, your organizations, the companies that you work for. And this is a really good primer for you to kind of understand where spokespeople kind of fit into that, as well as just some general kind of 10,000 foot view on dealing with the media and crafting your message. So what is the media? And that's something I usually ask to a room full of folks because everyone is muted. I'll just kind of go into this a little bit. So usually when I ask this question, people say, oh, it's social media, it's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the Lansing State Journal, Ann Arbor News, that sort of thing. And for our purposes, really what we're talking about when we talk about the media is that and everything else. For our purposes, the media is a way to push out your message to influence public opinion and move your issue. So obviously that can include more traditional media like radio and television, which will be teaching you some skill sets on Friday on how to deliver your message to those outlets. Then also you've got digital media, social media, and those type of ways of pushing your message as well. But also the media is really about relationship building and trust building. And a lot of that has to do just with communicating with reporters, bloggers, editorial boards, that sort of thing on your issue or your organization. And additionally, it's about having processes in place for when dealing with the media. And that's true whether you are trying to set up an interview or post to your organization's Facebook page. It's always important to have processes in place to ensure things go smoothly. And additionally, having a good understanding of how the media plays a role in your work, having those processes in place and building those relationships can help you gather information as well about your issue, how the public is perceiving it, and potential opportunities for you to leverage that information. So real quick, to get it out of the way, there are kind of two types of media when we're talking about media. You have earned media and paid media, and they're pretty self-explanatory because they're right there in the name. Earned media is press hits that you get, news stories that come out about your issue because you've done some sort of media engagement. Maybe it is a press conference, or you are releasing a report online and you gin up press around that. It's kind of what we traditionally think about media events, the person standing up at the podium, that sort of thing. But it's the media that you get from your sweat equity. You've done your research, you've practiced your talking points, you've pitched the media, you've set up your event, and you get press hits from that. But then there's also paid media, and this is media that is right there in the name, paid for. It's billboards, commercials, newspaper ads, digital ads. We're seeing more and more actually that this type of media is much more prevalent when we're talking about issue areas and advocacy. But the important thing to remember is that a lot of the principles that we're going to teach you through this training, as well as the spokesperson training, bleed into both of these areas equally. So messaging 101. What is a message? A message is anything that captures and keeps somebody's attention and leads them towards a desired action. This is true whether you are trying to sell soap or sneakers, or you're trying to, frankly, sell the public on an issue that you care about, whether it's PFAS, lead, renewable energy. We want our messages, when we're putting them out there, to capture attention, keep that attention, and then lead to some sort of action. And we also kind of talk about messages as, and I'll get into the difference between message and narrative a little bit, but we like to always frame our messages as a short, concise statement. And there are several reasons for this, and I'll get into it a little bit more in depth on Friday. But the important thing to remember is that if you are crafting your messages in short, concise ways, one, they can build into each other more effectively, and you also have more control over your voice. And I'll talk about this in the spokesperson training, but if you ramble on and on with answering a question, you kind of lose control of your voice. You lose control of your message. So it's always important for us to remember to try to keep our messages short and concise. Additionally, a message should be linked back to your overall narrative. And this is another type of training that we do on what we call the hero's narrative. But your narrative is really kind of your aspirational vision for the world, or your organization's mission statement. And you always want to make sure that your message is linked back to that narrative. Otherwise, it should be thrown out, because obviously delivering a message that doesn't connect back to your narrative or your mission statement kind of weakens your own narrative, and we don't want to be doing that as effective spokespeople. So just to kind of touch on message versus narrative a little bit more, again, message is something that captures and keeps attention and leads to a desired action, but narrative is kind of message plus more. It has all of the elements of a good message in that we're trying to push people to do something after we've captured their attention, but it gives more context. It paints a bigger picture, a vision for the world, or some sort of truth that our organizations feel about the world. At Progress Michigan, our narrative is very simple, and we were very intentional about that, because unlike some other organizations that might be focused on environmental issues or healthcare or reproductive rights, as a progressive advocacy organization, we focus on a lot of different issues. And so what our narrative is that Progress Michigan is working to build a more sustainable, equitable, and welcoming Michigan. And it's important to remember, too, that that narrative is one broad in context, aspirational, but also rooted in values. And we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of values at the spokesperson training on Friday. But I'll also touch on it a little bit with this presentation today. So this is sort of a visual representation of the difference between narrative and messages, and the importance of, frankly, sticking to your message to strengthen your narrative. Kind of working from the outside in, your narrative is the big box. It's the square around the outside of these littler ones. And just again, as an example for Progress Michigan, our narrative being wanting to build a more sustainable, equitable, and welcoming Michigan, that provides us a pretty big box for other campaigns to live in, which brings us down to the 4 smaller boxes. Those campaigns could be clean air and water, affordable, accessible health care, racial justice issues, raising the minimum wage. The important thing to remember about those campaigns is that they fit within our narrative. And then within all of those campaigns, looking at the 3 dots in each smaller box, are our messages. So your messages help build up your campaign, and your campaign should help build up your narrative. So this is sort of a visual representation of showing how maintaining message discipline, understanding what your organization's narrative is, and then finding the campaigns or the issue areas that can connect those messages back to your overall narrative. So how do you craft your message? How do you let's say you're talking about the PFAS issue, right? How would we go about wanting to talk about that if we were starting a brand new campaign or organization focused on that? Well, you'd begin by first crafting some of your messages. So again, keep it short. I emphasize this a lot because this is something that we're going to talk about at the spokesperson training. It helps you keep control over your voice. It helps you remember questions and prompts and things like that. And keeping things short will help you emphasize the most important parts of your message. Also, what's important to remember when crafting your message is sticking to values. And this actually goes right back into the next 2 points, or actually really right down the line. Values help us speak to people's emotional decision-making parts of their brain. For a very long time, we have, especially folks in the progressive environmental community, have kind of worked on this false assumption that people are rational beings, that if we present things with the right facts, figures, and statistics and lead with those, then people are obviously going to believe us. But the fact of the matter is, more often than not, people make emotional decisions about something and then find the facts, figures, and statistics to back it up. So an effective message really can appeal to people's emotions by sticking to values. And the next slide kind of hits on some of those. But the nice thing about values is they're, whether you're talking about equality or freedom or opportunity, these are sort of these squishy concepts that allow us to, one, speak to people's emotional decision-making parts of their brain, but then also helps us kind of reach across what some may see as like partisan or ideological boundaries, because values are sort of vague, sort of squishy, but there's something that people can empathize with and identify with regardless of where you come from. In addition to that, it's always important to remember when you're crafting your short, concise, values-based messages that you are using the best messenger possible. Somebody like me, I've been at Progress Michigan for 6 years. I've worked on everything from renewable energy to minimum wage to the Flint water crisis to immigration reform, healthcare access, everything. And I'm pretty good at talking about a lot of those issues. However, Deputy Comms Director Sam Inglot might not be the best messenger to talk about a specific issue, especially when we want to appeal to folks' emotions and their values and have them empathize with us. So consider, if you are working on a healthcare campaign, maybe the best person to deliver your message isn't the executive director of your organization, but a working parent who has struggled with access to healthcare. If you're working on a PFAS issue, sure, a scientist might be great to talk about a piece of research, but as far as the human impact, a family affected by a drinking water crisis like PFAS would be a much better messenger because they have a lived experience that people can relate to. And that just makes delivering that message that much more powerful. And that goes right back into the stories versus facts. Stories are frankly how human beings, since time immemorial, have conveyed truths about the world, morals, life lessons. Most of the time when people are, come home from a day of work and they're talking to their family members about how their day was, we speak in stories, right? Oh, over at the during lunch, this happened, or at the office, this happened. And we talk about how, I was talking with Jeff and I was talking with Ron and this funny thing came up. We don't say, 20% of my day was spent doing X and 30% was doing Y. Same thing with public policy issues, with issues like PFAS, lead, renewable energy, healthcare. These are things that, these are complicated policy issues, and it's always best for us to utilize the real human impact, the stories that people have through their lived experience to lift up these messages, because that's how we empathize with each other. That's how we connect with each other as human beings. And then again, when you're crafting your message, you want to make sure that it links back to your overall narrative. I'm not going to get into the message box today. That's just a bullet point that I forgot to remove. But moving on to values. Again, when thinking about the values that might be at the core of some of your messages, and the things that you might want to lift up, and we can kind of brainstorm some of these at the spokesperson training when we're going over some talking points and elevator pitches and things like that. These concepts like freedom, justice, opportunity, equality, these values are really sort of vehicles for the issues that we're working on. Something like a justice, right? Families that have been poisoned because of corporations dumping chemicals into their water supply, deserve justice, and that value is utilized. Really, our campaigns are sort of a vehicle for those values to move forward. So always be thinking about how you can frame your messages utilizing something like this, these values-based concepts, rather than leading with a statistic or a number or referencing a study. It's always important for us to root ourselves in our values. Now this brings us to our elevator pitch. So, you have crafted sort of your message, and we'll get into a little bit more about some of the toolbox, if you will, of how messages come into play when dealing with the media. But the elevator pitch is sort of a good crux to think about our messages from. So again, wanting to keep our messages short and concise and wanting to build on one another is important. And conveying why something matters is also very important when delivering our messages, not just some sort of abstract policy about what a certain policy procedure does. And that's where the elevator pitch sort of comes into play. What we say kind of anecdotally about an elevator pitch is that, let's say you are going up to the third floor for something of a building, right? And you get into the elevator and somebody else gets in the elevator with you, and they're going up to the second floor, but you're going up to the third floor. A elevator pitch is a short, values-based, concise statement that when somebody says to you, hey, what are you going up to the third floor with? You whip out your elevator pitch. And in the time that it takes you to get from the ground floor to the second floor, you have just captured their attention so much, and you've got that, that action that you want them to take, and they're just so compelled by your elevator pitch that they decide to skip the second floor and come up to the third floor with you to see what it's all about. And the elevator pitch is very useful for practice and beginners, because it helps you really frame what matters most to your issue. And when we're talking about issues like PFAS and lead, these can get somewhat complicated and convoluted, and especially when you're talking about policy prescriptions and parts per million and funding and all those sorts of things. So an elevator pitch really helps us kind of fine tune and focus on what is important when delivering that message. So here's sort of kind of a sample template, if you will, for an elevator pitch. And an elevator pitch really shouldn't be much more than a paragraph or so. And you can see from that template here that really you could get it in about 3 sentences. So when talking about your issue, and I should also preface this with leading up to Friday or spokesperson training, more often than not, one of the very first questions that you might get asked at a media event is, what are you doing here today? Tell us about what's going on. And if you craft your elevator pitch, your opening statement really, in this sort of way, you will be able to answer that question effectively and use it also to build on, to hit on maybe some other points from your talking points. So a real baseline elevator pitch has three components. What's happening. This is the reason that I'm doing this media event. Convey a piece of information. And then this second part is really important, why it matters. And this is where you can utilize the values that you've outlined in your messages. And then the third thing, what can be done about it. So an elevator pitch is really kind of a beefed up message. You are capturing somebody's attention by saying what's happening and why it matters. And you would then urging them or putting out your message to some sort of desired action, whether that's calling on their elected officials or knocking doors or brushing your teeth, washing your hands, whatever it is. So that's kind of a good template for crafting an elevator pitch. And I've got kind of an example that I just sort of whipped up here. The PFAS crisis across Michigan is putting the health and future of our families and communities at risk. That's what's happening, right? Clean drinking water is essential to human life, and it should be accessible and affordable to everybody. That is sort of a, even those kind of squishy terms, accessibility, affordability, those are kind of rooted in values, right? Regardless of your situation, you have access to clean, affordable water. That's an important thing of why this issue matters, right? Plus, it's essential to human life. And then the third part, that's why it's important that we push our elected officials to fund efforts to clean up PFAS sites and ensure everyone has access to clean water. Again, that's sort of a action that can be tacked on to the end. And that right there is basically a quick summary of an elevator pitch. And this is something that we're going to be utilizing quite a bit on Friday, in addition to talking points that you'll be crafting, which I'll go into here shortly. So the media in your message, this is what we're going to be talking about on Friday. So first, we'll kind of get some of the press materials out of the way. And I've got a few examples of these, and I know Mara has some for you all, but I want to touch on them a little bit because these are some of the things that kind of happen before, during, and after any type of spokesperson opportunity. You've got your talking points, you've got your media advisories, your press releases, and then your letters to the editor and op-eds or opinion editorials and LTEs. So your talking points are your message. They should be personalized to the person using them. If you are doing a press event and and it's about PFAS and you are in a community like Skoda that's been affected by PFAS in the water, they should be personalized to that community. And let's say you have two people speaking at this event. If one is a scientist and one is a member of the community, then their talking points should reflect who they are and the perspective that they're coming from. A scientist could really kind of break down some of the nitty-gritty points of research and the policy prescriptions that might be needed to remedy the situation, whereas a person from the community can talk about how it's affected their family, how it's affected their neighborhood, and that sort of thing. The last thing you want to do is have a scientist talking for affected families and having a working parent trying to speak on behalf of a scientist or trying to really break down some sort of complicated research document. Not that they couldn't, it's just that it's important that you understand where folks are coming from and you develop talking points or messages to be delivered at the press event that reflect who they are and where they're coming from and where they are where they're coming from in their own lives. You don't want to drown your talking points with facts and numbers. These things can be used to strengthen your argument, but they shouldn't make up the majority of your talking points. Again, you want to try to be speaking from a human level, a values based approach when delivering your talking points. And it's always important. You're going to hear me say this so many times on Friday. It's important to practice them. This is true whether you are woodworking, ice skating, or being a spokesperson on your issue. It is important to practice your talking points, practice talking to the media. I've been doing this for 6 years, and I even will go to another staff member and say, hey, I've got a phone interview in 10 minutes. Can you throw some questions at me so I can warm up a little bit? So that's just an important thing to remember. A media advisory. And another thing that I try to emphasize on is how all these sort of build on one another. So your messages / talking points will help you craft a media advisory. Your media advisory and your talking points will help you craft your press release. And then those three things can help you craft a opinion editorial reflecting on the event or the cause or the issue. But a media advisory, let's say you want to, hold a press conference outside of a coal-fired power plant, calling on it to be shut down. A media advisor really is kind of a save the date for the press, saying, hey, we're going to be here at this time. Here's what we'll be talking about. Here's who's going to be there. You should come out. You should cover it. This is why it's important. A media advisory will contain, the 5 W's that we all learned about very early on in our writing elementary school days. Who, what, when, where, why. Should include contact information about a press point of contact that if a reporter has questions about the event, can call them and ask them questions. And one of the most common questions we get is, okay, but when do I send out a media advisory? And we say at minimum, it's important to send out a media advisory the day before an event, as well as the morning of an event, and follow up with pitch calls to reporters in that area to, 1, ensure that they got the media advisory, and 2, to check to see if they need any more information, and 3, to see if they're going to show up. And I'll go over an example of each of these in just a second here, but I'll get through the media advisory and press release first. So a press release, you've sent out your media advisory that is, based on your messaging, and everyone is prepped with their talking points. Now you want to craft a press release, and a press release is really your perfect version of the event or the information that you're presenting. You should write it as if it is this is the article that you want written about your event, is your press release. It should include, again, the 5 W's, who was there, what was talked about, why is this important, that sort of thing. Remember to include quotes, and this goes right back to some of the essential points about remembering the best messenger and some of the best practices for messages. Remember stories and the human impact of things. So while in your press release you might want to have a piece of context information about a recent study that came out about this coal plant that the event is centered around, it might not be best for your quote to be, from your local organizer or impacted family, to be about, oh, well, in Ingham County, 63% of all cases of asthma are linked back to, we want our quotes, the things that people are going to pull to include in their stories, to be about that values-based messaging, that human impact, the why something matters point of our messaging. If you have, obviously with any type of media event and this type of information, there's a lot of research and studies or past articles that we might want to reference to, or past events. So don't be afraid to include links or attachments to supplemental materials that can help bolster your argument or provide more context to what it is you're doing that day. And in terms of when to send a press release about your event, which, again, tells the complete story that you want to get out into the public, we always advise on sending the advisory out, either during or directly after your event happens. In addition, if you're doing some sort of stand-up press conference, you want to have copies of the press release available for any media that show up, so you are knowing that they are getting that physical copy. And then letters to the editor and op-eds are ways for you to basically submit a written piece to a publication sounding off on your issue. And basically the difference between an LTE and an op-ed is one is short, that's an LTE, and one is longer, that's an op-ed. It's essentially like a personalized press release. It's a chance for you to get a piece of earned media by just simply writing down your thoughts on something and submitting it to a publication. And it's nice because then you really have a lot of control over what's being said, and it gives you a chance to kind of be on your soapbox for a moment when that piece has ran. Again, consider the messenger for this type of thing. When we were doing the minimum wage and earned paid sick time campaigns, excuse me, there are plenty of people, economic researchers and folks like that, that we could have had sound off on, why raising the minimum wage is a good thing. But we chose instead to focus on folks who had a real life story to tell. Whether it was a minimum wage worker who tried to, advocate for raising the wage at their job and got fired and is now working on, the ballot campaign, or a parent who has a chronic condition that has forced them to miss work, or choose between, missing work because they're sick or, paying the bills, and they can speak at that real kind of emotional level to why it's important for everyone to have earned paid sick time policies. So consider that messenger, consider the stories, and linking it back to your overall narrative. I think it's always really important for us to remember that when we're working on these issues, whether it is PFAS, whether it's lead, whether it's renewable energy, to always be framing these things as kind of a step towards our narrative, a step forward on our journey. Because obviously, we want to have clean water and we want to have clean air. But once we clean up the PFAS, we still have plastic, right? We still have algae blooms. We still have infrastructure issues with lead pipes under the ground and things like that. So I think it's always important for us to frame our issues as a step towards a better future. And that's kind of where a narrative comes in, and having that aspirational vision for the future, for your community, for the state, for the country, and framing some of these issues around, once we clean out PFAS, that's a step towards having, the type of state that we want. But there's going to be something else that we have to work on. We don't want to frame these issues as, once we clean up the PFAS, that's it, we're done. Michigan's water's clean. We're all set here. We want to make it part of a bigger thing, so we can keep folks engaged, so we can continue to build momentum for issues, and so we can continue to push folks to that kind of aspirational vision, that better future for our state. So that's kind of a weird side rant there. But when it comes to LTEs and op-eds, again, where do I send it? How do I send it? And this is, I think, where if you think back to one of my first slides about relationship building, this is where it's really important. And this is true for all media materials, whether it's a media advisory, press release, LTE, op-ed. It's important that you pick up the phone and call and ask where these things need to be sent. Because if you simply rely on Google and you go to the Detroit Free Press website and, here's where op-eds go, here's where a press release goes. There's so many times where I've found that those are actually, like, the places where they're listed online are just a black hole where press releases and LTEs go to die. So it's important that when dealing with the media and being spokespeople and advocates for our issue, that we pick up the phone, make calls, or at least send emails and say, hey, I've got this press release, I've got this media advisor, I've got this op-ed or LTE. Who should I send this to? Where's the best place to send it so I know somebody will see it and I know who I can follow up with? Because some publications for letters to the editor have a link that you click, and then you copy and paste it into a text box and include your name and contact information. Then you hit submit. Whereas other places have you send it to an editor and then they'll follow up with you. So all publications are different. Everyone has a different system. So it's just a good idea for you to pick up the phone or write an email to somebody and get that correspondence going. So you're knowing that this work that you're putting to all these press materials pays off by actually getting in front of somebody's eyes. So that's just a really important thing to remember as well. Oh, wow, look at this. Media relations builds right into this. Talking to people and building relationships, just like with anything else in life, right? Whether you are part of a book club, or you're talking to your neighbors, or you're talking to your colleagues at work, or your partners that you work with, it's important for us to build relations with the media. They are human beings. They've got a job to do. And if you can be an asset to them and they can be an asset to you, then building that relationship is really kind of key. And I always say too that it's important to remember that, the media is not your enemy, like a lot of people like to believe nowadays, but they're not necessarily like your friend either. You want to have a professional relationship with them while still being friendly. And I think that just goes for a lot of things within our work in general. So, when you are doing spokesperson work and you are putting on these type of earned media events, whether it's a press conference or releasing a report or having a protest, it's important that folks in the media see your media materials, your advisories, and your releases. And so what I usually urge folks to do is to create a press list. And this goes right back to picking up the phone, calling people, sending emails, and making those personal yet professional connections, because you can pay for services and things like that will make a press list for you. They'll scour the internet and pull things up, but I've found that oftentimes those are unreliable, or there are dead emails in them and things like that. And frankly, with our somewhat shrinking media environment, it's becoming much easier to build an organic, highly accurate press list by simply calling a publication, asking to, talking about who you are and the issues that you work on, and finding the best reporter to put onto that press list. So when you have a media event in your area or around your issue area, you know who it's going to, because you've made that connection, and you know that, oh, John over at the Oakland Press works on environmental issues, and I know that he's going to see it because I have him on my press list. And that just goes right back to picking up the phone and making those connections. We'll go into this a little bit more on Friday. Going off the record with a reporter is, it sounds like it's one of those, people think of like, Watergate and Deep Throat and meeting the secret contact in the, in the parking garage and talking off the record. But, off the record is something that I would really only urge you to do if you are a seasoned media professional and you have a very, very strong relationship with a reporter. And a few things about off the record. One, going off the record is something that the terms and agreement to what off the record means between you and that reporter need to be agreed to prior to any off the record conversation actually happening. Because you may think, oh, this is off the record. No one's ever going to, this is never going to get back to me in any way. It's not going to print anything. But to that reporter, off the record might mean, oh, I can still quote Sam, but I'm going to quote him as, a progressive media activist in Michigan, says this. Well, there's not that many folks that could be, right? So you just want to make sure that you're both on the same page when going off the record. And I would just urge folks not to do it. If you stay on message, if you stick to your talking points, if you keep your answers to things short and concise, there's really no need to go off the record. But if folks have questions about this, I can go over it more on Friday. Interviews. This is what we're going to be doing a lot of on Friday, and you're all going to have so much fun, and you're going to come out much stronger spokespeople because of it. So, one, heavy process for interviews. Even here at Progress Michigan, where I've been, talking about things like FOIA reform and more transparency and accountability in government. I've been talking about that issue for 6 years. But if a reporter calls me asking me about a FOIA bill, I still run it by my executive director. It's important to have processes in place because, one, that helps you ensure that everyone is on the same page in your organization and no one is getting in trouble. And two, it also helps you ensure that you have message discipline. because while we want to make sure that people's stories are getting told, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our message is being delivered in the way that our organizations want it to be. And so we don't want people doing interviews with the media unless they've gotten prior authorization or go ahead to do so first. So that's important, is to have a process in place. Next, you're going to want to become a reporter before you do any interviews. The first thing to do is know what what the reporter's deadline is. If they are not saying I need to publish this within the next 5 minutes, that's why I'm calling you to get a quote from you. If they're publishing it, if their deadline is 2 days from now or 2 weeks from now, that's important to know, because then that gives you more preparation time. Additionally, you can find out what sort of angle they're taking. If they're talking about a health or a PFAS issue, well, are they taking it from a policy perspective and a certain bill that's moving from the legislature, or are they kind of focusing more on how people in the community have been affected? And that can kind of give you some information about how you might want to prep, how you might want to, what talking points or messages you might want to prioritize. And sometimes it's good too to ask them who else they're talking to. That way, you won't be, if they're talking to, one of your partner organizations that is going to hit on a certain angle, then I can cover this side of that issue instead. So figure out the format of the interview. Is it live? Is it pre-recorded? Is it for radio? Is it for TV? Is it over the phone? That sort of thing. Is it a live studio audience where they'll be asking questions? These are the types of things that you're going to want to know prior to doing any sort of interview, because it can help you prepare and be a better messenger and spokesperson. And then the next three here are my kind of 3 interview commandments. And those are to practice. Like I said, you're going to hear that from me a lot. Speaking is a skill that you will get better with in time, but it's just like, before you go out for, go out to play softball, you want to stretch first, right? If you've been sitting in your office all day and you haven't talked to a single person, and then all of a sudden you're picking up the phone and doing an interview with somebody, your mouth might be a little bit rusty. Your brain might not be used to kind of thinking on your feet and pivoting, which is something we'll talk about on Friday. So you're going to want to practice your talking points, or at least review them, review the message, think about the question, any potential questions that might come up. 2, keep it short, keep it concise. When a reporter asks you a question and you answer, and that little voice in the back of your head says, ooh, say that other thing, that's usually a good place to stop, because more often than not, the last question that you're going to get from a reporter is going to be, is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything I missed, anything else you want to touch on? And that's a good point for you to bring up any other kind of ancillary or follow-up things that you didn't get out in your first answer. Additionally, keeping your answers short and concise gives you that control over your message that we want. If you answer a question with a 1-sentence or 2-sentence answer, you know exactly what that reporter can print about you answering that question. However, if you ramble on and on for, 6 paragraphs, if you give them a whole, dissertation on this answer, then you run the risk of them, you don't really know what they could pull out of there. Maybe there was a line that you delivered that, wasn't totally on message, and you risk doing that, or you risk losing the question or forgetting where you were. So just having that idea of keeping your answers to questions during interviews short and concise gives you more control over that voice. 3rd, feel free to say, I don't know. Do not be an expert where you're not. If some reporter asks you about, this elected official said this about this issue, what do you have to say about that? If you haven't heard about it, if you don't know what the context is, if you don't know what they're talking about, feel free to say, I don't know about that issue, and instead talk about something that you do know. And that's where pivoting comes in. That's something that we'll practice on Friday. The last thing you want to do is, fudge it. The last thing you want to do is kind of, I think it might be this. And then next thing you know, you are getting something wrong, or you're going off message, or you find yourself tempted to outright lie about something. And obviously that's nothing that we don't want to do that in life nor in the media. So it's important for you to just stick to what you know, talk about what you do know, feel free to say, I don't know about that, but you know what? I can dig into it and get you more information. Or I haven't looked at that yet. Let me get back to you. So those are kind of the three main interview commandments. Practice, keep it short, feel free to say, I don't know. And then the other interview techniques and strategies we'll go into on Friday. Press events. You've done all this pre-work to build your press list and have your messaging, and you've practiced your talking points and all that good stuff. So let's say you want to put on a press event. What are some things to consider? Number one, location, location, location. Know the difference between public and private property. You want to do a press conference outside of a coal plant? Great. Don't go into their parking lot because that's private property, but you can definitely stay on the sidewalk where that's public property and hold your event there. But you also don't want to block the sidewalk and prevent people from walking by. Think about what kind of locations can help add some sort of depth or interesting element to your message. Do you have a rain location? If you're doing something outside and it rains, where do you go? These are things that you want to consider when talking about your press event. Just going down the line here, teleconferences are a really great way to get your message out and do an earned media event with very few logistical kind of question marks, right? Because all you need is a conference line, which there are plenty of free conference call services that you can use. And then you can have your media advisory, just have the telephone number and the access number for reporters to call into. And then that gives you, statewide or national reach, or allows people who are from different geographies to participate in an event together. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Going right along with, the format of your event is visuals. If you're doing some sort of stand-up press conference or a protest or a rally, what are some of the visual elements that can help you add some depth to your message, especially for TV cameras, right? They don't want just somebody standing up at a podium talking. If you can do some signs or heck, a parade float or that sort of thing to add some interesting visual elements to your press conference, it'll make it a much more rich event. And that goes along with, being creative and thinking about how you can have earned media events that aren't just people speaking, but are, have a little bit of a different twist on them, right? So I'll leave that to, you all in your organizations to kind of figure out, but, I'll talk about one real quickly where we were working on a roads campaign, trying to fund the roads. And this was years ago when we were, even talking about the roads then. And we were basically, it was a general fix the darn roads kind of message, right? And we weren't really saying anything new, but what we had was from the laborers organization was a school bus that they had contracted with a Hollywood prop studio to build a piece of a fake bridge, and they smashed the front end of this bus in and mounted this piece of fake bridge onto it, and it looked like a bridge had collapsed onto this bus as like this is the type of danger that we're talking about when we neglect our infrastructure. And that was a wildly successful that was actually a media tour in several cities, and we had reporters come out from all over the place because of the strong visual creative element that added a new layer to, frankly, a message that was sort of stale. Everyone knows we need to fix the roads, and we weren't saying anything new, but we had this really good visual element. Have a plan, have a point person for your events. This goes right back into this whole having a process for all of this sort of thing. You don't want to look unprofessional. You don't want to be, running around pulling your hair out the day of a press event. So have a point person who's in charge of making sure things go smoothly, that they're keeping track of who the media is there, that the speakers are prepped, that sort of thing. And then follow up. Press events, especially any sort of thing out in the public, whether it's a rally or a press conference, there's a lot of sweat equity that goes into these things. So make sure that if you are putting in the work to do this event and lift up this issue, that you're continuing to talk about it. You don't just want to put all this work into an event and then get some press and then never talk about it again. So something to keep in mind. Social media. I bring this up because it's important when we are talking, especially leading up to a spokesperson training, to know that social media is, I'm going to skip the first point there. Social media is on the record. If you are going to identify yourself as a member of an organization or a spokesperson on an issue, a reporter could, would, will look at your social media And if you identify with an organization or an issue publicly, there's no reason that they can't take your social media posts and have that reflect back on the organization that you're with. So it's just important to be careful and conscious of really what, frankly, your kind of like personal brand and your organization's brand is, and think, how would this reflect on my employer? How would this affect on my campaign, my organization? Is this the type of message I want to be putting out? Social media is pretty much permanent. So don't think, when I was a reporter, I was always, before I would do an interview with somebody, first thing I would do is go and check their social media. So something to be kind of cognizant of. But the beautiful part about social media, other than, the fear I have just ingrained into all of you, is that you can use it to make your own media coverage. You can use it to influence your friends, family, colleagues, neighbors that you are connected with. Every press event that Progress Michigan does, we live tweet and Facebook Live it, because even if media doesn't show up, which that happens sometimes, we know that, okay, we're putting it on Twitter, we're putting it on Facebook, we're doing our press release, we're doing everything that we can to make sure people see this. So social media is a great tool for doing that. In addition, it's really good for tracking information about your issue, your campaign, reporters that cover it, other partner organizations, opposition groups. So utilize social media for that. And that's another type of training that we go into a little bit more in depth. That's kind of in our training repertoire. Something to consider about social media, it's constantly changing. I'm sure folks have heard about the Facebook algorithm that changes, it seems, on a nearly daily basis. But additionally, we're seeing changes in best practices, new platforms, things like that. So while you shouldn't feel obligated as a spokesperson or as an organization to do everything, but you should be keeping track of what is going on and utilizing the platforms that work best for your organization. And I'll just kind of hit on this a little bit. Consider a budget. For just a little bit of money, you can really expand your reach on social media, whether it's boosting or promoting a post on Facebook or Twitter. So consider that as well within your campaign. And that is oops, I knocked my headphones out. Hold on. And that's so that's kind of the presentation there. I'd like to open it up to any questions that folks had. I know I went over a lot of things. I'll probably recap this a little bit to start off on Friday, just in case folks have other things come up between now and then. But I welcome any and all questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. So while folks start chatting in any questions that they might have, I was wondering if you could kind of explain the difference between a 501c3 and a 501c4 and how that changes the type of media work that you can and cannot do, or if it does at all.
Yeah, so 501c3 is, let me think about this here. So, a C4 is typically more like expressed issue advocacy. We want this type of policy. The way I kind of view it is sometimes like C4 is more aggressive, whereas C3 is kind of more, softer, if you will. And I don't necessarily claim to be an expert on this. And this is another thing why it's really important for you to have a process in place, because the difference between, especially with grants and things like that, and if you have multiple sources of funding for your organization, depending on where that funding is coming from, might determine whether it's C3 and C4. And I know, for example, that like a C4 can do work that a C3 can, but a C3 can't do C4 work. So like C3 is typically more public education type things, and trying to inform the public about a various issue, whereas C4 tends to be more sort of expressed advocacy, pushing for something explicitly versus just sort of informing the public about it. But again, the thing I would emphasize for this group is to have that process in place. That way, okay, I'm writing a press release for, this piece of our campaign. Well, that's C3 funded. So I'm going to talk to our executive director about how that works. And okay, I'm getting a call from a reporter about this issue. Well, this is C4. That's a C4 project. So I know I can talk about it this way. So I would say, yeah, that's just another reason that it's important to have like process and lines of communications open within your organization.
Great. Another question has to do, you kind of touched on this already. It's with social media and algorithms. Do you have any tips or tricks about what the latest are, or is this just something that you always kind of have to be looking into and trying to determine best
Yeah.
practices?
So I'll just kind of, there really this sort of, there's three, as far as, organizations, campaigns, that sort of thing. As far as I'm concerned, there's really three main flagship social media platforms. You've got Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And as far as kind of quick and dirty best practices go, Facebook is not the same as Twitter. Twitter is something that you cannot post enough on Twitter. You should be tweeting, multiple times a day, live tweeting events, creating large tweet threads about, a committee hearing or a new piece of research that came out. Whereas Facebook is kind of, Twitter's kind of your how do I want to put this? Like your fast food, trying to just crank out as much as you can. And Facebook's kind of more like a fine steak. You want your content on there to marinate and be slow cooked and done the right way. So what we typically do is, usually no more than like 2 posts a day on a Facebook, like on Progress Michigan's Facebook page. Granted, if there's some sort of breaking news that we definitely want to get out there, we'll do that. But you really want to kind of prioritize using your best content on Facebook. Both Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, just at its core, visuals really go a long way. So consider, what's a photograph that I can go with this, or an infographic, taking a piece of policy research, right? A stat of some sort of, wonkiness, and how can I turn it into a visual format? How can I utilize video? And one thing I will say about video is that, sure, having a good camera and a professional, create your own video content is great. However, what we're seeing more and more is actually sort of, how would I want to put this? Not low quality, but sort of like everyday video, like some of the most effective video. And I was actually at a meeting with Google and YouTube, and they talked about how high quality, high def, professionally developed videos actually had lower engagement than videos just shot on people's iPhones. And particularly around issue advocacy, some of the most effective video type content that we're seeing is face to camera. A person, standing there with, looking into the camera, talking from, again, that kind of like human perspective, right? That personal experience. So you can do a lot with just your own phone and, talking to an activist or talking to a canvasser or talking to a researcher and just pointing the camera at them, letting them talk, quickly editing on your phone and throwing it up on social media. So that's kind of, I would say, some of the quickest sort of best practices for at least Facebook and Twitter. Instagram, obviously heavy on the visuals there, heavy on the storytelling, and sort of the personal connections. But so understand that visuals are big right now, and understand the difference between Twitter, which is a rapid fire, you can't post enough, and Facebook, which is, you want to really prioritize and think about what your posts are going to be, and posting much fewer times than Twitter per se.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. And as a reminder for folks, Sam will be in person on Friday. We are a little over time for today, so we're going to wrap up. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. We do have our evaluation. It is required for all current Health Leaders Fellows. However, we also strongly encourage all other participants to complete the survey as well, as your feedback is valuable in planning future meetings. So I'm going to chat that out for folks just so that they have it. And like I mentioned, we will be meeting on Friday. So we'll be meeting here at our Ecology Center Ann Arbor office at 10 a.m. Like I mentioned, Sam will be here in person, so if you have other questions for him, you can ask them then. And if you haven't already RSVP'd, please email me. And I just want to take a moment. Thanks again, Sam, so much for hopping on today and presenting for us. We're really excited to have you on Friday. And thanks to all of our attendees. We will see you on Friday as well.
Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday.